to boldly go where no one has gone before. Part 2 of my Star Trek movie rankings coming up next. Remember to go into the description and click that link for a free ebook and follow and share and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let's do it. Welcome back to the YouTube channel, Great Stories Change the World. Today I'm going to get back to my Star Trek movie rankings. And, I believe that great stories do change the world. We should tell great stories, and we should learn how to tell great stories, because not everybody knows how. And so that's what this channel is all about. And we're going to be getting back to my Star Trek movie rankings here, where we kind of go over the second half of my list. If you go back to the first video, I did numbers 13 through 8. And in this video, we're going to go over 7 through number 1. So these are going to be the better ones, obviously, at least in my opinion. And I really want to hear your feedback. So let me know in the comments how you feel about my list, my rankings, where I rank certain things. Something I didn't talk about in the last video was about Gene Roddenberry. If you go through some writings, and I mentioned William Shatner's books, Memories, Star Trek Memories, and Movie Memories. Those two books, really insightful about Gene Roddenberry and who he was, and kind of how he developed Star Trek and why, and just Star Trek was his brainchild. And he did the TV show, but then when you get into the movies, it was a really difficult relationship between Paramount and Gene Roddenberry. And he goes over this in these books, especially the second book, Movie Memories, where, leading up to the movies, there had been, a lot of tension between the stars of the TV show, especially Leonard Nimoy and other people, and Paramount, just trying to move forward and make good movies. But Gene Roddenberry had all these kind of crazy ideas, and he really wanted to do this weird time travel movie where they went back in time and had to make sure that JFK really was assassinated or something like that, which is really interesting because Stephen King kind of had a book like that they ended up making a show about. I haven't seen the show, but the book was really interesting by Stephen King. All that to say is Gene Roddenberry had all these crazy ideas, and he never got to have his ideas come to fruition in the movies because Paramount and other writers and directors and producers would kind of try to work with him, but then realize he didn't know how to make a good movie. Like, they were trying to make a movie that really engaged people and yet still kept the heart of Star Trek. And so when we're getting into some of these really good movies, then, Gene Roddenberry really wasn't as involved. Unfortunately, he was really involved in the TV show, and of course, when the budget went down, then they got canceled. And really, he was a genius level guy in a lot of ways, but some of in his later life, there was a lot of tension between directors and producers because Gene Roddenberry didn't have full control on the movie side, but he really wanted a lot of input, and the input wasn't always, welcome. So it's kind of a sad story in a way, because as a writer, right, you want to have control over your property, and if someone else is going to go, make a movie out of it, then you would really like for that to be something you really believe in. And he didn't really kind of get that. But at the same time, we have a lot of really great Star Trek movies, and I think they did kind of maintain the heart of the idea of Star Trek and the characters especially that kind of move forward in the movies. And ironically, or maybe not, I'm going to start here with number 7, where we deal with the reboot. So on number 7, we deal with kind of the reboot with J.J. Abrams. And I went over this in the last video about how this was one of the original ideas about doing movies, like maybe go back at some point, especially as the original cast was getting older, maybe go back, recast them as young people, and do some sort of Academy TV show or something like that. Well, they kind of took that idea and obviously adapted it to a great degree with the Star Trek reboot in 2009. Now, there hadn't been a Star Trek movie in, 10 years or so. since Nemesis. And Nemesis wasn't one of the best. I liked Nemesis, but it wasn't one of the best movies from Star Trek. And so in 2009, they get J.J. Abrams involved. And we all make fun of this movie because of lens flares, and so this is kind of an origin story with Star Trek. And what I really like about this one is they didn't try to fit it into the original timeline. Yes, there's time travel. There's like, I don't know, 4 or 5, almost half of these movies deal with time travel, and which is kind of lazy if you ask me. But at the same time, this was really interesting because instead of trying to fit this reboot into the original timeline and trying to kind of do a prequel sort of thing, which they have done in a certain sense with on Paramount Plus in one of the new Star Trek TV shows with Captain Pike. But instead of doing that and having all those limitations, right? Because you were going to have all sorts of limitations as far as like, well, you can't kill this person, you can't do that. And that really kind of messes up the stakes. It messes up the characters. It really limits you in what you can do. And so therefore, what they did is they kind of used this time travel to make this alternate timeline where like the old Spock has to come, or he gets sucked into the black hole and he comes back, and there's just all this stuff. And so that really allowed them to stay true to Star Trek, but freed them in a lot of ways to really give big stakes. Like, we don't know, are people going to die? They blow up Vulcan and they do all this stuff to kind of give us this idea like they could do some really major things here. So they give us stakes, and these are more action adventure movies, or they aren't as much Star Trek movies, but they really do have that kind of the core idea of it, and the core characters are there, and I liked it. I thought it was a good movie, and that is my number 7. All right. So here at number 6, in 1986, we have The Voyage Home. Now this is Star Trek 4. And so when we're looking at the different movies, this kind of completed the trilogy. And part of the reason that Star Trek has success with the movies, and we'll get to a couple of the other ones later on, with Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and then The Voyage Home, is they were telling one continuous story and yet putting it in movies, but they weren't episodic. They weren't episodes. They were still really kind of epic movies. Now, The Voyage Home has the lowest budget, and you can tell they do a lot on the streets of San Francisco, and so they don't have to have as much of the big budget, Star Trek budget, that maybe some of the other movies had. But this was a really interesting choice of something to do for a movie, because you had 2 really epic stories with Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock, and all these big things happen and people die and big stakes. And the movies needed a lighthearted sort of shift in tone, because this is what you want to do as a writer. You want to, after these big moments, if you have more and more big moments, the audience gets tired, right? The audience gets kind of weary of what you're doing. And so you need to kind of have some time to process. And as much as the main idea of the movie was kind of cheesy, they did a really good job with that in this movie, where they kind of pulled these people together. They had a mission, but there was a lot more interplay with some of the characters, and I thought actually it really worked for that reason. The whole whales and the environmentalist thing, and where we all want the environment to be good, and I'm not saying I'm against that, but it was more agenda driven in the idea. But Nimoy does a great job again with the directing, and it was his idea, and there was just some great stuff that happened in the movie and the characters in it, and it's still very entertaining and a great Star Trek movie. So that's number 6. At number 5, we have Star Trek Generations. Now this was in 1994, and David Carson was a director, and he was from the TV show Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, Roddenberry had a lot to do with the inception of The Next Generation. So when Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock and these movies were just exploding, he had the cachet again to do a TV show, which is really more his heart. That was really more his what he wanted to do. That was more his vision, was to do TV shows. And that was his expertise. And so he pulls in a new Star Trek show and new characters and does some interesting things and brings Klingon on, the Enterprise, and there's more of a peacetime with the Klingons and the Federation now and all of this sort of stuff. And it was a great TV show. So when that show was kind of ending its run and it was supremely popular, then they decided to start doing movies. So they started to try to transition from the original cast, which was getting old and they needed to kind of be done, and the movies were still good and probably making money, but they wanted to transition into this other cast as the TV show kind of ran its course. So this is what they did. You've got Kirk and Spock, on a mission together to save a planet with billions of people. And, the basic storyline is good. It's not amazing, but really they did a great job, kind of pulling this together, doing some character stuff with Data, with Picard, doing some stuff with Kirk, and giving him a good ending, right? So, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, Kirk dies at the end. But this was a great transition between the two movies, and I love this movie. It was a great movie, really well done. A lot of the cast and the crew and the creatives from what was really a great last few years from the TV show were a part of this movie, and they did a great job. All right, and so here coming in at number 4, we've got The Search for Spock. Now this is Star Trek 3. Now Wrath of Khan was hugely successful, and it kind of found a great formula, a great sort of mix and recipe for a great Star Trek movie. And, they kind of set it up for some possibilities of bringing Spock back. And so they kind of had to come up with this mystic, religious element for Spock to come back. And he gave his soul to McCoy, which I really thought was a great choice. Like that it was McCoy that he gave his soul to, and they had to use, to get McCoy to here and go get the new Spock from the Genesis planet. I thought it was really well set up because, Kirk and McCoy, Spock and McCoy always had this sort of tension between them, and they were always arguing, and they were foils of one another character-wise. And it made for great TV and great character engagement. So the fact that, Bones had his soul was perfect, poetic irony. And all of that together was amazing. The writing was good. The stakes were big. They blow up the Enterprise. Kirk's son dies. Again, it's another epic movie that really focuses on the characters and friendship and all of those things. And this is Nimoy's first crack at directing, and he did an amazing job. I really thought he did an amazing job because he understood the characters and he understood the vibe of what they were going for. So that is number 4, The Search for Spock. Again, a great movie. Number 3, we have Star Trek First Contact. Now, this is another phenomenal movie. I'm going to be saying this a lot in this video because this is, the top 7. So this was right after Generations, and this was the first real Star Trek The Next Generation movie. And they did what they should have done, which is they made it epic. They pulled in the Borg, which really gives a lot of character development for Picard and the crew. And, the crew's all back, and they, Worf had gone on to do some stuff in Deep Space Nine, and so they bring him back, and it's kind of a fun way. Really well done movie overall, and a lot of really interesting interactions, but then it's not just the Borg. They're dealing with the Borg along with dealing with the beginning of space travel. I think his name was Cochrane, Zephram Cochrane, or whatever his name was. He was the first warp guy. The guy came up with warp and led to the first contact between humans and aliens. And it was just great all around. I mean, the movie flowed well. The different storylines kind of worked together well. And, this is one of the best. Like, it's still a great movie, very entertaining, and the character development through, a lot of the movie, especially with Picard, because it was a Borg and things like that, was really well done. All right. So number 2, we have, some people might be surprising. Some people might have put maybe First Contact number 2, but I'm going to put at number 2, The Undiscovered Country. Now, this is Star Trek 6, but here at number 2 is what I think is one of the best, obviously, Star Trek movies. Star Trek 5, as I put, way back there on my list, was not a good movie. It was really a bad movie. The only thing that makes that movie entertaining is some of the interplay and character stuff with Kirk and Spock and Bones, but it's really sort of, it really is a bad low budget movie. But they decided to go out with one more movie. They decided, well, we'll do one more because it's still going to make money no matter what we do. But I really have to give them some credit because they could have just kind of phoned it in and done a really bad movie, but they didn't. What they did was they got everybody back together. They did there was like a murder mystery, and this was kind of like influenced by the falling of the wall and communism and the Russians and and the West, Soviets and the West kind of learning how to live in peace. And so this is a really great movie. It's got a great theme, great characters. And you really, and of course, Kirk is the one who has to go and kind of try to make peace. And he's got all this history with the Klingons. They killed his son. And this movie is just really great. It's got a great space battle. It's got some great elements to it that just make it in my opinion, it's actually a perfect Star Trek movie because there's all the different elements of great sci-fi and the characters, and they just the original cast went out with a bang, in my opinion, and this is a great movie. So that's number 2. Number 1 would not surprise anybody. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, is the best Star Trek movie. I don't need to go into all of it, but Paramount really, it wasn't necessarily a flop, but the first movie wasn't received super well. Star Trek people are going to come back, but they really that's when they started to kind of edge Roddenberry out more and try to bring in more people. A couple of people like Harve Bennett, they didn't really know that much about Star Trek, so they learned a lot about Star Trek, and then really tried to make a great epic movie. And so they take Space Seed, which is one of the episodes, I think, from season 1. It's in there. One of the first 2 seasons, Space Seed, and they brought back Ricardo Montalban, who plays an amazing villain. Some parts are cheesy, right? Khan, and there's all this stuff. But it's really a great movie. They give us a space battle. And there's a lot of interplay character between Kirk and Ricardo Montalban, who plays Khan, and of course the ending is epic. Again, great stories are all about stakes. What's at stake? Is it a friendship? Is it peace? Is it? And man, you got to give us some stakes. And here in this movie, Spock dies. Right? There are consequences, there are stakes, and there's a cost. And so this movie is amazing. That scene at the end between Kirk and Spock, people said, they were crying when they filmed it. The crew was crying when they filmed it, and then they cried when they watched it back, just to edit it through. Like we cared so much about these characters. They did such a great job pulling this movie together. So that is my list. Star Trek, Wrath of Khan, number 1. You let me know what you think of this list, what you think of my list, my top 7 or my top 13. And remember to like, follow, subscribe, comment, tell me what you think. And I will see you next time on Great Stories Change the World. All right. See you later.